I can learn from the phase. I have 3 young children, so
do you need all your devices?
So you guys have a network shoe? Can you sign this on? It's not. Let me see if I downloaded it. Oops. Yeah, here we go. Got it. Sign into. Okay. So the part we'll study today is teaching the joy of obedience. So I understand that this is supposed to be a discussion. So I just kind of put some questions on here for us to discuss. How many of us read the chapters? No? Okay. You study here. Okay. All right. Okay. So it comes to no surprise that as parents, we feel there's a need for obedience, for our children to obey. And a lot of that has to do with our upbringing. You know, some of us were taught, okay, when you obey means obey and don't ask. And this is how it is. It's my way or the highway. Actually, there's no other alternative. There's no highway. It's just my way. Okay. My way or my way. Those are your two choices. One thing we have to, the book made a point to stress, or stressed on, was that parenting is not about getting kids to simply do what we want. A lot of times this is our, focus, is just to get them to do what we want right now. Maybe because we're busy and we don't have the time, or it's the most convenient, or I think my way is the best way, or my kid doesn't understand what I understand. That's good. Thank you. And children need to learn obedience because this is a very important biblical and Christian principle. Part of our Christian upbringing and our correct understanding of who God is our obedience to Him. And children first understand this from the family and from the parents. You'll find this very consistent throughout, life, is that when you find children who learn to be obedient to their children and to authority, they'll find they're obedient to their teachers, their Sunday school teachers, their counselors, the priest, and ultimately to God. Thank you, Thank you, Mike. And ultimately to God. Because when I can obey the authority that I see, then I can obey the authority that I don't see. A couple of verses here. One is in Colossians 3. St. Paul says, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord." And in another, he says, "Obey your parents in all things." This is, of course, assuming that the parents want the best for their children. Unfortunately, we look around and this is not the case all the time. Where sometimes there are parents that don't want the best for their kids, professionally, in their growth, maturation, and their spiritual development. Sometimes parents don't care about some of these, and sometimes you'll find they pay so much attention to their education and not so much to their spiritual life. Or they might pay too much attention to their spiritual life and their social and their school life is lacking. So, assuming that the parents want the best for their child. There's also a couple of verses here which weren't in the book, from the book of Sirach, which is one of the Deuterocanonical books for the apocryphal writings that are canonized, of course, in our church. He says, "He who honors his father atones for his sins." Look at the strong verbiage here. If I honor my father, then it's as if I atone for my sins, meaning my sins will be forgiven me. "And he who honors his mother is like the one who stores up treasure." So when I honor my mother, it's like storing myself up treasure in heaven. He who honors his father will be gladdened by his own children. Again, if I honor my father, I will gladden in my own children, because I will pass on the same principle of obedience to my children. Just like in the story of Tobit. Remember the story of Tobit? His father Tobit was very generous and very kind, and gave to the poor and buried the dead. And when it came for his son took the same kind of spirit from his father. And when he prays, he will be heard, meaning the father's prayer will be heard. He who honors his father will have a long life, and he who obeys the Lord will give rest to his mother. So he says here, it's like a promise. If we obey our fathers, we will have long life. Of course, here this doesn't necessarily mean long in number of years, but there can somebody who might live short years, but their life is filled with joy and peace. So it's almost they can say, I lived a full life, although it might be shorter. And then he who obeys the Lord will give rest to his mother. Of course, all of us, it brings, as I know for sure for the mothers, it brings us heartache when we see our children away from God and going and following the wrong path and the wrong places. Of course, the fathers feel hurt as well, but the mothers take a lot of the grunt of this. And he will serve his parents as his masters. Honor your father and your mother in word and deed, that a blessing may come upon you from him. So it's very deep. Actually, this whole chapter, if you want to read it, speaks about honoring your parents. So the first two questions will be, what? Is obedience necessary? I think we would agree yes, right? We established that. Why does it sometimes get a bad rap in our society? Why does obedience sometimes is looked down upon in our society? What do you think? Or is it looked down upon?
I think yes, because they want the kids to develop their own personality.
Okay.
So they don't want the parent to really be on him, tell him everything that he needs to do.
Mm-hmm.
Then he can.
Yeah, disadvantage of freedom.
Hey, they look at this and it's amazing. This makes no sense to me, but they look at this and say, when I force my child to obedience, it robs him of his personality, right? Of his development.
He'll be trying to please you more than
seeing who he really is. Do you see any problem with that?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think this is a healthy, mindset?
I think if you are not looking after his own thing, so you're still gonna give him those things, then he can have a little freedom. You're not gonna be on him all the time because you want the best for him and you want him to have his own personality too.
Right.
But if somebody abuses the force and does it obsessively, it probably will affect you.
Actually, and this is the key thing here, is that we teach obedience without being controlling. Okay, this is the key. So they found, of course, that demanding obedience from our children doesn't work in the long term. Of course, it works in the short term, because that's sometimes what we're after. But it doesn't always work in the long run. And the book makes a point to point out that we have authority as parents. There's a certain authority that God gave us as their parents. But we shouldn't use that authority, make it right?
No.
As Rami said, to crush their will, or to make them submit to us and strip them of their way of free thinking. Yeah. Look at this quote here. This is Rudolf Dreikes. He's one of the scholars in this secular parenting books. He says, look, since democracy implies equality, parents can no longer assume the role of authority. Authority implies dominance, one individual having power over another. So this is what's being taught. Let me ask you, how many of us, before we take our children to go get their immunization shots, ask our children and make sure they fully understand what this shot is doing, and ask them, do you want to get your immunization shots? How many of us do that? It doesn't matter. From the infancy even up to the 10, 12, however, when we go to the doctor says, take this so you can be healed. We force our children to take the medicine, right? And if they don't, there's going to be a big problem in the house, right? Because this is what's best for you. So why is it when it comes to something like this, we force them and say, oh, Now you're being dominant, or you're being using your authority to put this kid. This doesn't make sense, right? Because we know for sure that this is something that's healthy for them. So in the same way, when we say, okay, the democracy implies equality, but there's a difference. We have a responsibility before God to train up our children, right? I don't come, if I'm a professor and I have a student who wants to seek a PhD from me. I don't sit there as the advisor and say, okay, I don't want to limit your freedom, do whatever you want. Okay, what classes do I take? I don't know, do whatever you want. Do you see this? No, there's always a training. There's always a training. So why is it when it comes to our children, there's no training? When a young kid comes and says, who's a boy, and says, I feel like a girl and I want to wear high heels. Where is the responsibility of the parent here? Is it not to teach them the right gender identity and how to act like it? Right? There's a responsibility that we have. It's not, we just let them do, whatever they want. So this is very unhealthy, way. So it gets a bad rap because the people, I think, in our society, they don't understand, the role of authority, and this is healthy for us to go. Because again, if I go with this idea of having no authority, even my parents, they have no shot of submitting to God, and they'll spend the rest of their life fighting within themselves. And you'll see this in different, demographics, the people that deny God and that want to kind of have this freedom even from God, they'll find this. They seek after pleasure, and then they're miserable doing it, right? Because they're fighting against the Creator that created them, who said, "This is the system that I've created, and now you're rejecting me, your Creator." So
Society abusing the power of freedom.
yeah, they're misunderstanding it. Absolutely, to its fullest. It's gotten.
That's they abuse it, like
Yeah.
they use it to the max.
Yeah.
There was no limits.
Yeah. No limit, and it's like there's no wisdom either.
How can we protect our kids from this? I mean, we are in a society. I mean, and I still think that the society is doing this because there is so many bad parenting examples, people with issues that can abuse their. That's why they are limiting their influence in the kids, which kind of makes sense if you see the bad examples, but obviously we are not in the same examples, or we are not comparable, but at the same time, how can we tell the kids in such a young age, because they are exposed to it outside in a young age?
I think that's that it comes all in the home. They'll see a lot of cruel things, a lot of wrong things outside, but it doesn't make sense. When they see this, it doesn't, because that's not the normal things we see when you observe in society. We observe order. Like I said, when I go to the physician says this, I take it. Do I understand everything? No. When I get on an airplane, I don't know exactly how the jet engine works, nor do I even know the pilot. But yet I'm risking my life getting on the airplane and taking a flight, right? So not everything we understand, but there's some element of faith involved, and then trust, right? And this kind of, okay, makes sense. Okay, if I said the percentages of flights that fell out of the sky was like 25%, majority of us wouldn't fly a flight, right? But when I say it's 99.99%, then okay, pretty confident that it was not going to fall. So we risk our lives getting on there. So this is kind of just what makes sense because this is what they observe. And when they hear this thing initially, it's confusing, right? So it's our job to certainly teach them this.
It is isolating them from the society, I could think. I mean, it's bringing them to private schools or homeschooling them really like a good idea towards doing it, or leave them in the society and try to always be with them and guide them? Which one is
I mean, I don't think you probably, so the thing is, a lot of this stuff is said between the peers, and the peers in the private school are the same peers in the public school. They're the same kids,
Yes.
They're all watching the same YouTube videos. They're all playing the same video games, right? They're all chatting with one another. It's kind
So
of
you
the
can't
same.
really isolate them, or you can?
You can do it to some extent in terms of how much you allow them to be exposed to them outside of the school environment, and then helping them choose friends that are godly. Then this will certainly help. The friends, I can't stress more, of helping your kids choose right and godly friends, this will save them from a lot, you know. So there's a lot, of course.
The channel.
It is, it is. How is it that we as parents can misuse our authority as parents in regards to obedience? So how is it sometimes that we can misuse this authority when it comes to our parenting? I think we said it. When we go from obedience to controlling, where we want, you know, to be the controllers, what's the difference between obedience and controlling?
Think obedience like tell them about the stuff, the good ways they should follow,
Mhm.
and let them understand that consequences could happen. That's you choosing to do it bad.
Yes.
So that's no controlling. It's control and uncontrol at the same time. Like you give them the choice. Like God give us a choice. So you make them like kind.
So
When
whenever
they
we
choose,
say
they
whenever you say
understand.
choice, there's no control at that point.
Yeah.
So to be clear, we can't say I give them choice and I'm controlling. No.
No, but when you guide them and took them like in a nice way, without the control, without the force, without how you say it, like they feel it like you threaten them, or
Yes.
you gonna make no toy for you as a
Yeah.
punish or something. If you, so it's kind of, I call it like you control and uncontrol at the same time.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you feel like you control it like in direct way. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is exactly it. We give them maybe, you know, two choices that we approve, and you ask them to choose one. Like one of the examples in the book was the author's son wanted to wear baseball pants to a wedding. So that's said we don't wear baseball pants to weddings. You know, there's a certain way to dress. So he ended up says, okay, you have brown pants and blue pants. You can choose which one. But the baseball pants are not an option, right? So here we're setting limits, but then giving them some room, yeah, to choose. So they feel like they can choose. So yeah, obedience involves their choice, but of course, there's always got to be some kind of consequence if they do choose the wrong thing, because again, this is something we observe in the Bible and we observe in society. There are certain consequences that go wrong with wrong decisions. I can't run a red light and then next to a cop and assume nothing's going to happen. You know, something will happen, especially this time of year. They need their Christmas money. Okay. Question 34. What is the importance of listening in the home? What is the importance of listening in the home? Of course, you know, we're speaking, I guess, with our children. Since that's what we're talking.
And it helps them to open up to you. And then also they will mimic. I mean, they will, if you don't listen to them, they will start doing the same thing. They will start avoiding.
Yeah, they'll stop listening to you. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think it boils down to the respect.
Yeah.
You know, when I listen to someone, I respect them. So, cutting them off, right, or being distracted while they're talking is all things like that show that we're not listening to them. So it is really important, and I think
And building up it's make it a habit too.
yes,
Like the person he gonna think he wanna talk to, he gonna be you. If he used to, you used to listen to him in building a relationship with him and listening.
Yeah, and I have to say from experience, and it's very important that because sometimes your kids will in the beginning they'll tell you things that you'll be surprised about, or they'll say things that's gonna make you what did you say? You know, so it's very important when we hear these things that are like big red flag alarm and everything. We keep it cool, and then talk with them and explain to them. Because once we overreact, or once kids react in this, they get scared. And sometimes they're just scared.
That's not gonna be the point of losing.
Yeah, exactly. They'll remember this and never come tell you anything. And it's always, whenever we have these kind of discussions, to re-emphasize with them, please feel free to tell me anything. I won't be upset. I'm here to help you. So they feel comfortable that they're not going to get in trouble. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I don't want to tell my parents because, they're or one particular parent because I'm going to get in trouble. Mom, don't tell dad because he's going to take my phone away. Mom, don't tell dad because he's going to spank me. Dad, don't tell mom because, whatever. So you got to be very careful. Also, he was speaking here about, the next question was, how can we nurture a culture of listening in the home? He brings a couple of points here in the book, which I think were good for us perhaps to practice. He says, when using your parenting authority to nurture a culture of listening in the home. I'm sorry, what was your name? Mehra. She said the modeling, when the parents model, not just with us and our kids, but husband and wife together. If a child sees mom and dad when they speak with one another, they're allowing each other to speak, and there's empathy on the other side, and there's understanding, and we can talk and have a discussion without yelling, screaming, perhaps saying some things that are bad in a different language, whatever it is. And the kids can tell by our tone of voice, even if they don't understand what we're saying, they can tell by our tone of voice, is this a healthy conversation or not a healthy conversation, right? So modeling between mom and dad will help them feel, okay, this is something that's comfortable. Also using words to convey feelings rather than act things out. A lot of times kids, when they get upset, they get violent, right? Start throwing at my kid, one of my kids. If he gets upset, whatever's closest to him, he's going to throw across the room. So it's a race between me and him, or my wife and him, to get to that object before he does, to say whatever it is, it's going to get thrown across the room. There's one point, thank God he doesn't do this anymore. Like when he got upset, he'll take his hand on the counter, and whatever came down, came down. Yeah, but thank God we passed this phase. But it's important for us when we see them get upset to try to get them to talk about it rather than to act it out. This is training. There are adults till this day, many adults, that can't do this. When we get upset, we close in, we don't talk, we get angry, we punch a wall, we kick down a door, we slam the car, we do something physical, right? Because I haven't been taught that when I'm upset, to sit down and talk about why I'm upset, right? So again, here modeling mom and dad, to try to do this even between themselves, and certainly with the kids. Is this something that we can do, or is this something challenging?
Should be most of the time.
We can do it. Yeah, it takes a bit of control, but it can be done.
90%.
Yeah. Also, he says here, prohibit interruptions. So if somebody's talking, we can't cut them off. So in like family counseling between couples, they teach to have like an object. Whoever has the object is the one doing the talking. So the other person is forced to listen. And I can only talk when I have this object in my hand. You can do the same thing with the family. If you're having a family time, and especially if we're talking about maybe making decisions together as a family, or it could be things trivial like where we're going on vacation or whatever we want to do. But at least so everybody makes sure that they're heard. Because you'll find if you have children, like if you have a family of more than one child, you find one is more domineering than the other. One is more talkative than the other. So we have to pay close attention to the one who's not heard, or the one who maybe it's not his, natural ability to express themselves, that he gets a chance to talk, and the other one listen. And you'll find, you give that one who doesn't really talk, the cross or whatever, to talk, the other one's going to cut him off, right? So you have to enforce it. It's not your turn to talk. This is what he has to say, so he can do it. So here we practice listening and speaking at the same time, and respecting one another when we do that. So we have prohibit interruptions. I think is also helpful. Question 5. I know we only have a few minutes left, so we'll just cut me off whenever. There are 10 questions, so we'll go as fast as we can. Listening is an act of veneration. Veneration here is like when we respect and honor our children as icons of Christ. What behaviors should we avoid when teaching and practicing listening? There are several here. Do you guys can think of any? When we're listening to them, what should we avoid doing while we're
Cutting off them.
Okay, cutting them off, interrupting them. Good.
Looking at the phone.
Looking at the phone. This is the biggest one. Looking at the phone. I remember when my youngest son, I think he was like 2, very young. And then, a lot of the priest's work is on the phone, whatever. So somebody had texted me something that was important. So I was sitting there next to him, and I was sitting there for a while. And then I looked at my phone and was responding to this message. And he's like, "Daddy, look at me." It's like, okay, you're right. You put it away. So it takes discipline on our part, and maybe this is a spiritual thing for us as parents and as adults. Is there, maybe to ask ourselves, have we developed some form of addiction? Not addiction like maybe I have to have it, but I need to be up to date all the time. What somebody said or what's on my phone. Maybe sometimes we develop this itch. If I see the bubble that has 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, this makes me itch, and I can't think of anything until I get this bubble to 0. So we got to get over these kind of things. Because there'll be you'll chase it, and you'll never you'll never finish. You'll never finish. So that's a good one.
Why Abuna was in the past? He was able to be keep up with everything. Now you can't keep up.
Yeah, you can't keep up, and you never will. This is something we have to come to terms with. And I remember Ambi Yusuf told us, as clergy once, he had told us, there's nothing more important to you than the person in front of you. We ought to, I can't, it's very disrespectful if I'm sitting here, I'm giving this talk, and then somebody messaged me, and I look at it. This means what? That the person who's not, you guys don't see, and I don't see, and who messaged and maybe is doing something else is more important than the people that are sitting in front of me, right? So, always put that in your mind, that the person in front of me deserves my undivided attention more than the person who's not. Also, we have to avoid criticizing when our children are speaking. Sometimes we might think things are trivial or whatever, but we have to be careful of this. Also, we mentioned giving advice, because remember, when we're listening. Myself, I'm listening, and I'm having the solution before my kid is done talking, because I know the pattern. So I have the solution before he's done talking. So this is what I'm thinking of. But they teach that this isn't good listening, because you're thinking of something else rather than giving your attention to the child. So it's best to just listen, let them finish, and then you can speak with them. I remember my children actually taught me this. When we were in the car sometimes together, we listened to anybody heard of Adventures of Odyssey? Ever heard of that? It's like a Christian adventure audio recording. They make a lot of difference here, professionally done. So they're very nice, and they have usually a good moral lesson from it. So sometimes we listen to these things, and then we'd listen together. And then my son would interrupt to talk about something in the story, and now I'm just okay. I want to listen to the story, because if he's talking, I'm missing something. And then I was like, this isn't right, So I ended up doing. I said, whenever we would listen to this and he'd start talking, I would turn it down very low, and just focus with him. And I would wait until he told me, "Daddy, turn it back up," because then he'd be done talking. And I did. And the strange thing, there was actually, it could be 5 minutes that we missed, but he never said go back. So this taught me that this was for him is a bonding time with me. And what he really wanted was to talk with me, and this gave us something, or to talk with.
Subject.
Yeah. So I think it taught me a good lesson, that when they speak, whatever it is on in the car, I turn down and give them my attention. Okay. Question 6. What are the dangers of not listening to our children when they are well behaved? Sorry, type this like that. So sometimes, kiddo, we have children that are well behaved. They sit very nicely when we want them to. They're rare, but they're around. Yeah. And so when they do this, we feel like, okay, they're on autopilot, so I don't need to focus. Just like the pilot, puts on autopilot and then reads a book or does something else. But our children, there's no such thing as an autopilot. They won't raise themselves. They won't guide themselves. So sometimes we fall into this, I guess pitfall of sometimes when they're behaving well, we don't really need to listen to them. Especially if they're bringing up things that are like a fairy tale, like some things, they can just talk about anything, about funny things, and you're worried about the mortgage and about some real world problems, your work problems at work, and marital problems if they're marital problems, and then he's talking to me about a flying alligator, whatever. So, but just because he's not causing a problem doesn't mean we ought not to listen, to them or disregard what they have to say. He says, when we dismiss their problems, our children's problems, we dismiss and disrespect them and teach them to dismiss their inner world. So what is he saying here is that when we dismiss what they're thinking, what they're living in their world, this teaches them that what I'm thinking is not valuable. So they begin the seeds of looking at themselves as unvaluable, and my opinions are never valuable. So you'll find among them, maybe among their friends, among their peers, they have this feeling that what I say is not valuable. If the teacher in class is asking for our thoughts about something, his first thought is, no one cares what I think, right? So I'm not going to speak up. So they'll live this life of, I'm not valuable, and have this fight with,
And maybe sometimes the opposite too, that sometimes we feel that what we talk about is valuable, so you don't look at my valuable, so you are not valuable to me.
Yes.
So even what you talk about yourself, you are not valuable, as you didn't value what I'm
Absolutely.
talking about. So sometimes
it can be reversed as well. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they see this modeled in the parents. You might have some families where, only dad speaks, and whatever dad says goes, and mama, whatever she says, she doesn't say because she knows not getting it anyways. She doesn't speak. So again, this is what the child, grows to learn. That there are some people that speak, and there's some people that listen, and that's it. But of course, this isn't healthy. Question 7 was, how can we listen to our children when they misbehave? This is the challenge, right? It says we listen to show we care, not just to get info or solve a problem. So when they misbehave, listening shows that we care about them rather than the problem that they've created, right? Sometimes we get focused on the problem and we forget why they're doing the problem. A lot of times it's for attention, jealousy, different reasons, right? So it's important when we get them to talk. I know when my wife is better than this than I am, but when one of our children gets really active and upset and starts throwing things or doing something like that, she'll sit next to him and ask him what's he feeling, why is he upset, and I'm just like, stop throwing this, okay, or go to your room, whatever it is. It's just like, but she's like, she's better at talking to them. He says it maybe, this is really good. It's not a quote, but it's kind of like a summary. It says it may be possible to know what our children are struggling with without listening to them. Sometimes we can know what our children are struggling with because we know them. We can, by their face, by the way they carry themselves, their nonverbals, we know what's troubling them, right? So it's possible for us to know what struggles our children are having without us talking with them or listening to them. But then it says what? But it is impossible to teach our children to think and make decisions without listening to how they are feeling and what they are thinking. So it says it's impossible to teach without listening. So I can know the problem and perhaps solve the problem without listening to them. But I can't teach them without listening to them. And this is the key. We're trying to teach our children, not just, solve their problems. Because again, they're adults to this day, 40, 50-year-old grown men who have to go back to their mother to ask them whether we should buy so-and-so for my family. Not, what does your wife think? What's best for your children? No, I have to go ask mom what to do or go ask dad what to do, right? So we need to learn to listen because this is how we teach them. Anybody want to comment on this? couple more questions. When listening to our children, should we always act on their complaints or struggles? What do you think? So if you have this kid here, you got two kids. One's eating a hamburger and fries, and the other one's looking at it. What do you think that other kid's saying? Or maybe.
I don't want to eat.
Yeah, I don't like that.
No.
Right? I don't like that. I want, something else. And then you said, no, I'm sorry, this is what we're having for dinner. So his brother's eating, and he's upset because he wants pizza. Right? So should we always act on their struggles or their complaints?
No, I know, but discuss.
I have to talk about it.
Yeah. So we can address it, but we don't always have to act on it. Right? So we address it and we talk about it, but I don't always have to solve it, right? To cater to them.
So we can sometimes do what they want and sometimes say no. That will not confuse them because like this is what's happening with me with Emmanuel. He's just like no on everything.
Yeah.
He don't want to eat any healthy food. So like sometimes we try to do that with we let him starve, but he just cries and like sometimes we give up and we give him some food, but it's not healthy.
Yeah.
So he won't get confused because sometimes I say no and it's just like in control, and sometimes it's just like okay. Whatever you want.
I don't think he's getting confused. He's just learning how to manipulate.
So it's just like say no all the time. But
it usually doesn't take a lot of times. If he really is hungry, he won't do it again. He won't do it. I know it's hard. As a parent, it's hard. But believe me, they won't die. They will eat anything before they starve.
For the age of Emmanuel, I believe
How old is he?
strict a little bit because he's just too little.
How old
so
is he?
You have to,
it's like 3 years and a couple
to
months.
try to starve him as a try. Maybe his type of food, his body's type of food, because sometimes we have that nutrition.
Yeah.
You listen to your body. Like sometimes eating the vegetables actually hurt your stomach and body. So sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean for him, everything healthy is bad. Like he just wants sweets.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he's always like go push without any reason. Like he just runs and push. Like what's
It's
going
because
on?
he's a boy. That's because he's a boy.
No, but I mean the other one is not like that. So what?
Because he's the oldest. But for the food, maybe you can start as a stepping stone is only give the sweets as a reward.
Yes.
So if you eat this, but you get this, and if you don't eat it, then you go and get it. Khalas. Right? And then hopefully he'll eat it to get it. Even if it's just to start, you start with a little bit, and then next time you say, okay, you have to eat all of this before you get anything else.
Make them the healthy food in the view of the sweets.
Yeah. I use the food like as an example, but he's like that, and he's just like so stubborn, and and sometimes I just like no means no, and especially Amgad, he's like no, and he listens to him, but I would say no all day long, and he wouldn't listen to me. Yeah. Sometimes I just like no, and then sometimes like okay, whatever.
He knows about it. He's willing to take that risk to get what he wants.
He knows probably he can get away with you. So
but
that's why he tries to push your buttons.
You just got to be tough. And both parents, the kids are very smart. Both parents need to be on the same page. So a lot of times you'll find the kids will come and say, give me this, and then you might give it to him, but you always have to ask. Both parents are in the house. Did you ask Dad? What did he say? Okay, I agree with that. What did go ask Mom?
If he knows you will give in and come to you.
Yes.
But find out what kind of from the healthy food or the type of food he likes, and even if in the other time he prefers the sweets, give them the type of food he likes. Keep giving to him until he see you eat from the other food, and then he gonna wanna try.
Yeah.
Like my Ivan, my little one, we never push him to eat what he didn't want. But we figure out what he liked. I try to offer it him that most of the time. And the candy I limit it at home.
Yeah.
I get it occasionally, or if it's come from outside.
So
he didn't have that option.
I think to some degree, even for the healthy food, we need to teach them to eat it even if they don't like it. And this principle actually of doing something that I don't like is a biblical principle. And how many of us like the commandment of love your enemies? No one likes this, but this is a commandment, right? there's some training, and it begins even with things like this. Like, okay, if you don't like vegetables, okay, we're having cucumbers now, and we're going to eat the cucumbers. And over again. And you don't want to make it like where you're going to force it down their throat.
My kid didn't like the lettuce, but he was like the broccoli.
Yeah.
So if that's what I mean, they have like the
there's
the stuff. Like
Give
find
them
out
different
what,
options until you find something.
until you find what you like.
There's no, I wish there was a formula
No,
that gets them all to like their vegetables.
He didn't like to want it all the time. So either have
Yeah.
that's the only best solution for him.
It's a challenge. The next question is, what is the benefit of listening to our children even when they do not have a choice? Like sometimes, the kids don't have a choice in something, but they need to still listen. He brought up a point here in the book saying, don't confuse listening with leniency. Listening doesn't mean to do or agreeing with. Listening means I understand you and I care for you, but I still don't agree with you. Right? Nor will I do what you ask. But I'm respecting you by listening to you, giving you that attention and focus. And I'll explain to you perhaps why I don't want this, but sometimes our explanation goes over their head, or they can't understand why vegetables are healthy, although they taste bad, right? So they're not going to be able to understand this. So he says, you may feel less in control when listening, but this isn't the case, of course. Listening simply means to pay attention to our children's struggles from their viewpoint. So you kind of put yourself in their shoes. Strip off all of the sophisticated knowledge you learn and try to see it from their
But
perspective.
speaking up is a relief at the same time for them himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Where they just feel like, okay, I got it out. Yeah. And this one, he also says, giving your children a voice even when they do not have a choice. We said listening makes them feel like heard. He mentioned a nice thing in there. He says, parents aren't police. They're not there just to keep law and order, but we're there to love and teach our children in love. The last question. Taking our children's feelings seriously is very important. How do we show our children we take their feelings seriously? I think one is listening to them, as we said. There's a nice quote from this Laura Markman. It says, "Connect with your child before you correct your child." Meaning, sometimes before we scold them about something they did, we need to make that first connection. Sometimes that connection is just going down to the level and looking them in the eyes. Sometimes it's when they're upset, you look at them and you smile, and then they realize, okay, mom and they love me. Okay, and then you say what you need to say. So make that first connection, because if it's just he goes this way and you want to go this way, and you just kind of butt heads, then it's not getting anywhere. But try to make that connection, and you'll find that if it's made, your children are more likely to listen to what you have to say. And he says, listen first instead of reacting. And of course, listening helps to de-escalate the situation and allow you to stay in control. A couple of last points. There was a nice quote. It says, the power of authority is greatest when we listen before dealing with the misbehavior. So we have the power and authority over our kids, but it's best when we listen before we react. And the last 2 points are, children learn from what we do than from what we say. And this is just a life lesson. Kids learn more from how we behave than what we do. It's I remember the other day, not the other day, a couple of months, maybe like a month ago, we were praying, together as a family, and then while we're praying, I just noticed my son is just staring at me and my wife, and the whole time. It's kind of awkward when someone kind of stares at you while you're praying. But I just let him stare at us because he's learning, he's picking up things, And I remember,
He's absorbing.
and actually, when I saw him at the corner of my eye. I went back and I remembered me doing the same thing with my father. I was looking at him when he prayed and how he prayed.
I noticed that too is my child was in the church and I was like that. And then he look at me like for a minute and then
Yeah,
he look at himself again.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. And even like the things we do when we don't notice, like sometimes the things we hum, for example. This is the kids pay attention to that. Like if we're like humming something secular, they'll like but then yeah, then they'll pick up on that, and then that's what they're like. The other day we were somebody showed me like a video about one of the hymns. So I was singing it, and then I was holding my 1-year-old, and then all of a sudden he starts back. I mean, he had no idea what he was saying, but he was trying to sing with me. Yeah, and then when I'd stop, he'd stop and look at me. And so I was like, maybe he's trying to pick it up, The last point is he mentioned here to reward first time listening, and what he means here is like putting emphasis on listening from the first time. So if you told him go make your bed, and he went up and made his bed, you reward that not necessarily by something, but you can by a compliment. You can say a word of encouragement. I'm very proud of you. I noticed today you listened from the first time. You went upstairs and you made your bed from the first time. You don't have to wait till I said it over and over again. This means a lot to kids when we praise them. Because a lot of times they're only looking for praise from us, and to feel like I'm meeting my parents' expectation. So to get that feeling, then it means the world to them. Then maybe this will begin a pattern. And when they don't, you say, remember the other day? You went from the first time. Can we do it from the first time? With this encouragement, voice.
And when he success, he get trusted for the second step for other thing to try. Like
he gets encouraged,
Yeah.
to do it. Okay, yeah, this is great. Any other questions? Okay. Sorry for being late and for going over and apologize. Sorry. Glory be to God forever and ever. Amen. Say a prayer. The East is this way. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for bringing us to this day and hour. We thank you, O Lord, for granting us, O Lord, to be stewards, O Lord, over our children. We ask you, Lord, for your wisdom, and to help us, O Lord, to guide our children. Help us, Lord, to guide them to learn to obey, that they might grow and be comfortable in obeying you, O Lord, even in the points, O Lord, and the times where they feel that it's difficult or unreasonable. Please, O Lord, give us, O Lord, this wisdom. Bless all, Lord, bless your children who are standing before you, and help us to be faithful in the talent, O Lord, of our children which you have given us. For the intercessions and prayers of the Lord, Mother, that the Virgin Theotokos, St. Mary, Archangel Michael, Archangel Gabriel, St. John the Baptist, and St. Paul. Hear us, Lord, when we say thankfully, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Now the love of God the Father's grace, one begotten Son, our Lord, God and Savior Jesus Christ, the gift of the communion, the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace. Peace will be with you all. Amen. Thank you, guys.